You think a piece of plastic makes you untouchable. The slap came before the words finished echoing. Douglas didn't just hit me. His fist twisted into my hair. Right there, in the center of the grand ballroom, beneath 1,000-crystal chandelier. Every elite guest saw it. "Douglas, please," I whispered, clutching the pregnancy test against my burgundy dress. "Everyone's watching." "Smile," he hissed. "You think you can trap my inheritance with a surprise brat?" The string quartet kept playing. Champagne glasses clinked. No one moved. A senator stepped aside so my husband could drag me toward the service exit like misplaced luggage. "Let go. You're hurting the baby," I gasped. His grip tightened. 2 years of silk-covered bruises. 2 years of curated photos and fake smiles. 2 years of pretending power looked like love. And tonight, I realized something. The baby wasn't my shield. It was his excuse. Douglas jerked my head back until I was staring at the chandelier. "Look at me when I'm ending this," he snarled. That's when I saw him. Not the senator. Not the guests pretending not to see. Him. Leaning against a marble pillar. Dark blue shirt. Sleeves still down. Jang Tae-Hyuk wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at my husband's throat. And for the first time in 2 years, Douglas wasn't the most dangerous man in the room. The service exit was only a few feet away when the air changed. Douglas was still dragging me when a voice, smooth, measured, cut through the ballroom. "Is there a problem with the lady, Mr. Hare?" The string quartet faltered. Douglas froze. He turned slowly, still gripping my hair, and that's when I saw it. For the first time since I married him. Fear. Jang Tae-Hyuk stepped forward. "No ruse." No raised voice. Just control. Under the chandelier light, his dark shirt looked almost black. His expression was unreadable. But his eyes, they weren't angry. They were calculating. "Stay out of this," Douglas snapped. "This is family business." Tae-Hyuk didn't even glance at him. His gaze dropped to Douglas's hand twisted in my hair. A faint smile touched his lips. "I dislike unnecessary scenes," Tae-Hyuk said calmly. "And this one is ending. She's my wife." Douglas never finished.
Tae-Hyuk stepped closer.
Not aggressive. Certain. 3 feet away now. Close enough that Douglas had to tilt his chin upward. "You are confusing possession with permission," Tae-Hyuk said quietly. The senator stopped pretending not to watch. The woman in silver lowered her glass. The room felt smaller. Let her go. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. For one reckless second, Douglas tightened his grip. Then he made the mistake of holding Tae-Hyuk's gaze. And whatever he saw there broke him. His fingers opened. I stumbled forward, but a steady hand caught my elbow before I could fall. Warm, controlled, protective. "Go to the car outside," Tae-Hyuk murmured, low enough that only I heard. "Black windows. You won't be returning tonight." For the first time in 2 years, someone wasn't asking Douglas for permission. The silence swallowed the music. Douglas stood frozen, hands hovering uselessly in the air. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. Tae-Hyuk didn't remove his hand from my elbow. He didn't need to. The room adjusted around him. Senators looked down at their shoes. CEOs suddenly found the wallpaper fascinating. The woman in silver stopped touching her pearls. "Mr. Hare appears confused," Tae-Hyuk said calmly, his voice carrying without effort. "He seems to believe a marriage license is ownership." Douglas swallowed. "You don't understand. She's my wife. This is private property."
Tae-Hyuk repeated softly.
He took one step closer, not aggressive. "Inevitable. Let me clarify something for everyone in this room," he continued. "From this moment forward, Donna is no longer subject to your temper, your threats, or your control." The chandelier light caught his eyes. They weren't angry. They were final. "She is under my protection." The words didn't echo. They settled. Heavy.
Permanent.
"And in my world," he added quietly, "protection is not symbolic." Douglas's shoulders sagged. The crowd shifted. sensing something irreversible had just occurred. Not a fight. A verdict. Tae-Hyuk turned slightly, signaling to a man near the entrance. "The car is ready," he told me. His tone changed, not soft, but steady. "You're leaving. Tonight ends here." I placed a hand over my stomach. For 2 years, I had walked beside a powerful man. Tonight, I walked away from one. The crowd parted without being asked. No one filmed. No one whispered. They simply watched as Douglas Hare realized something he had never experienced before. He had just lost control. The city blurred past in streaks of rain and neon. I sat in the back of the black sedan, my fingers still shaking, the ghost of Douglas's grip lingering in my scalp. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence felt fortified. When the car descended into a private underground garage, I realized this wasn't just protection. It was infrastructure. The elevator climbed without music, without mirrors. When the doors opened, I stepped into glass, marble, and sky. The city glittered below like something small enough to own. "Make yourself comfortable," Tae-Hyuk said from the terrace. His jacket was gone. Sleeves rolled. No performance. No audience. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" He walked to a desk and pressed a button. A wall illuminated. Security footage. Not of me alone, but of Douglas. Douglas leaving a private gambling club. Douglas meeting men in back rooms. Douglas signing documents he clearly didn't understand. Then the footage widened. My doctor's office. The grocery store near my park. Cafe. And yes, occasionally one of his men was visible in the distance. Not following. Watching the perimeter. "I monitor risks," Tae-Hyuk said evenly. Douglas became one. "You've been watching me. I've been evaluating the threat around you." That answer landed differently. He stepped closer, not invading. Grounded. "Your father once made a decision that changed my life," he said quietly. "He invested in a young man no one believed in. I do not forget debts." My throat tightened. "You were never the target, Donna," he continued. "You were leverage. Douglas needed you financially contained, isolated, afraid." The monitors shut off. Silence returned. "I don't rescue strangers," Tae-Hyuk said. "I protect assets that matter." "And I matter?" I asked. His gaze held mine. "You are not property," he said. "You are protected. Not owned. Protected." That difference shifted something inside me. For 2 years, I had been controlled by a man who mistook dominance for love. Tonight, I stood in a glass tower above the city with a man who mistook nothing. And for the first time, I wasn't someone's possession. I was someone's priority. The amber liquid in Tae-Hyuk's glass caught the moonlight as he set it down with a heavy thud. He walked toward the wall of monitors, his back to me, his silhouette cutting a sharp, jagged edge against the city lights. "My father worked for yours, Donna," he began, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register. "Long before I was a king of the underworld. I was just a boy whose family owed a debt to the wrong people in Seoul. Your father, a man with a heart too big for the business world, didn't just pay that debt. He gave my family a life. He gave me a future." I gripped the back of a velvet armchair, the burgundy fabric soft against my cold palms. "He never told me. He never mentioned you. He wanted you clean," Tae-Hyuk said, turning to face me. "He wanted you far away from the shadows I live in. But shadows have a way of finding the light." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "When your father passed, I made a silent vow. I would be the ghost in your corner. I watched you marry Douglas Hare. I watched you try to be the wife he didn't deserve. And I watched as he began to rot from the inside out." He reached for a manila folder on his desk and tossed it toward me. It slid across the marble surface, stopping at my feet. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside were bank statements, gambling receipts from offshore accounts, and, most chillingly, a series of emails between Douglas and a man known only as the Fixer. "Douglas has gambled away the Hare liquidity," Tae-Hyuk explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's been living on a line of credit that doesn't exist. But there's a family trust, $50 million, that unlocks only upon the birth of a male heir or the untimely death of a spouse. As long as you're alive and difficult, he's bankrupt. But if you were to disappear, or if he could prove you were unfit while he took control of that child, I felt a wave of nausea. I looked down at the pregnancy test card I was still clutching. To me, it was a life. To Douglas, it was a financial obstacle. He didn't just slap you tonight, Donna, Tae-Hyuk said, his eyes flashing with a sudden, lethal heat. He was setting the stage. He wanted witnesses to see a hysterical wife. He was planning to move you to a private facility by morning. From there, it's a short walk to an accidental overdose. I sank into the chair, the reality of my life shattering like the crystal chandeliers back at the gala. I had been living with a predator, but the man standing before me was something else entirely. The debt of blood I owe your father is now yours, Tae-Hyuk said, reaching out to tilt my chin up so I had to meet his gaze. Douglas thinks he's playing a game of checkers. He has no idea I've already flipped the board. You stay here, you keep the child, and I will make sure Douglas Hare loses everything he ever traded his soul for. The days that followed were lived behind glass. From the height of the penthouse, the city was a silent, sprawling grid, and I was its ghost. I spent my mornings curled in an armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the burgundy silk of my robe a sharp contrast to the clinical perfection of Tae-Hyuk's sanctuary. In this vault I was safe, but the world outside was beginning to burn. It started on the third day. I was nursing a cup of tea, watching the morning news on a screen that seemed to take up an entire wall, when Douglas's face flashed across the display. He wasn't the polished, arrogant man I'd seen at the gala. He was caught in the harsh, flickering light of paparazzi bulbs, his hand shielding his face as he stepped out of a black town car. The headline scrolled across the bottom in an aggressive crimson. Hare Global under federal investigation for offshore money laundering. I leaned forward, my breath hitching. This wasn't just a legal hiccup. This was a systematic dismantling. One by one, the mysterious legal pressures Tae-Hyuk had promised began to manifest like a series of precision strikes. By noon, the stock for Hare Global had plummeted 40%. By evening, the senator who had ignored my screams at the party was on television, publicly distancing himself from the Hare family and calling for full transparency and accountability. Tae-Hyuk entered the room quietly, his presence announced only by the faint scent of cedar. He didn't say a word. He simply stood beside me, watching the destruction he had orchestrated with a terrifyingly neutral expression. "He's losing everything?" I whispered, my eyes fixed on a clip of federal agents carrying boxes of documents out of his mansion. "A man who builds his house on the blood of others shouldn't be surprised when the foundation rots," Tae-Hyuk replied. He tapped a tablet in his hand, and the screen changed to a private feed. It was a security camera from a high-end bar. Douglas was there, disheveled and frantic, shouting at a man in a dark suit who was calmly shaking his head. "He's begging for credit," Tae-Hyuk explained. "But I've closed every door. Every line of credit, every silent partner, every favor he thought he was owed. It's gone. He is a king with no kingdom, Donna. And a cornered animal is the most predictable kind." I looked from the screen to Tae-Hyuk's profile. He was doing more than just protecting me. He was erasing Douglas's existence from the world that had empowered him. But as I watched my husband's empire crumble, a new fear took root. I was no longer a victim of Douglas's Hare, but I was living in the center of a storm controlled by a man who could destroy a dynasty with a few phone calls. The glass walls of the penthouse felt thicker than they had that morning, less like a shield, and more like a cage of a different design. The silence of the penthouse was broken not by the city's hum, but by the frantic vibration of a burner phone on the marble kitchen island. Tae-Hyuk had handed it to me an hour ago, his eyes unreadable. "He'll call this number," he had said. "He has nowhere else to turn." I picked it up, my fingers cold. Before I could even press the receiver to my ear, Douglas's voice erupted, jagged, breathless, and stripped of the polished arrogance that had been his armor for years. "Donna? Donna, listen to me," he gasped. There was a frantic background noise. Sirens, perhaps, or the rush of a crowded street. Everything is falling apart. The feds, the bank, they froze it all. I know you're with him. I know Tae-Hyuk took you. He sounded pathetic, a fallen king groveling in the dirt. Please, Donna, tell him to stop. Tell him I'll sign whatever he wants. Just give me enough to get out of the country. For the sake of the baby, for our family, don't let them take everything. I looked across the room. Tae-Hyuk was leaning against the far wall, a pair of high-end headphones resting around his neck, his arms crossed. He wasn't just watching me, he was monitoring the trace. He gave a single, slow nod. There is no family, Douglas, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There is only the debt you created. The shift in him was instantaneous. The begging stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. The mask of the grieving husband slipped, revealing the monster underneath. You think you're safe in that glass tower? He spat, his voice trembling with a new kind of vitriol. You think that Korean thug actually cares about you? You're just a trophy to him, same as you were to me. But I'm the one who knows where you hide, Donna. I'm the one who knows what makes you scream. I pulled the phone an inch away from my ear, his threats turning into a frantic hiss. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me, Douglas snarled. I don't care about the trust fund anymore. I don't care about the money. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to make sure that Brat never sees the light of day. Do you hear me? I'll burn that whole building down to hear you beg one last time. Tae-Hyuk moved then, stepping forward and taking the phone from my shaking hand. He didn't speak to Douglas. He didn't need to. He simply pressed a button on the screen, capturing the final, recorded threat before ending the call. The room returned to its tomb-like silence. I stood there, my hand over my stomach, the echoes of Douglas's rage still ringing in my ears. Tae-Hyuk looked down at the burner phone, then back at me. He just gave us exactly what we needed, Tae-Hyuk said, his voice a chilling contrast to Douglas's hysteria. He didn't just threaten a witness. He threatened my blood debt. Now, I don't have to wait for the feds to finish him. I can do it myself. The warehouse smelled of stagnant river water and diesel. A vast, hollow shell on the edge of the industrial district where the city's lights didn't dare to reach. Tae-Hyuk had tried to leave me at the penthouse, his jaw set in a line of iron, but I had refused. I was tired of being the girl in the burgundy dress waiting for the news to tell her if she was free. If Douglas was coming for me, I wanted to see the faces of the men he had sent to do his dirty work. Tae-Hyuk stood in the center of the concrete floor, his dark blue shirt unbuttoned halfway, revealing the black ink that crawled up his neck. He looked less like a businessman now and more like the shadow he had been born from. I stood a few paces behind him, my coat wrapped tightly over my stomach, watching three men emerge from the darkness. They were rough, jagged around the edges, the kind of men who traded in flesh and silence. "Where is he?" the leader asked, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. He held a photo of me, crumpled and stained. Hare said the girl would be easy, said she was just a runner. Douglas Hare is currently hiding in a basement in Queens, counting the minutes until the police find him, Tae-Hyuk said, his voice terrifyingly level. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't have to. The four men in black suits who had materialized behind us provided all the threat necessary. And the girl isn't a runner. She's mine. The leader looked at me, then back at Tae-Hyuk. The realization hit him like a physical blow. You don't take a contract on someone under the protection of the Jang name and expect to walk away. We didn't know. Hare lied to us. He said she was just debt. I am not debt, I said, stepping forward into the pool of yellow light. My voice didn't shake. I looked the man in the eye, seeing the flicker of fear that Douglas had spent years trying to instill in me. I am the reason your employer is losing everything. Tae-Hyuk glanced back at me, a flash of grim pride crossing his features before he turned his cold gaze back to the mercenaries. You have two choices. You can take the money Douglas promised you, which, by the way, doesn't exist in any bank account he controls, or you can give me the location of the safe house where he's waiting for your call. The leader didn't hesitate. He dropped the photo of me onto the dirty concrete and reached for his phone. As he spoke, Tae-Hyuk stepped back toward me, his hand resting briefly on the small of my back. It wasn't the grip of a captor. It was the steadying hand of an ally. The warehouse felt less like a trap and more like a courtroom, and for the first time I wasn't the one on trial. Douglas was, and his time was running out. The safe house in Queens was a rotting tenement that smelled of damp wood and desperation. A far cry from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers Douglas had used to define his worth. When Tae-Hyuk's men breached the door, there was no dramatic shootout. There was only the pathetic sight of Douglas's hair cowering behind a stained sofa, a half-empty bottle of bourbon in one hand and a burner phone in the other. He looked up as we entered, his eyes bloodshot and wild. When he saw me standing beside Tae-Hyuk, his face contorted into a mask of pure, impotent venom. "You," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ruined everything. You and your street thug protector." Tae-Hyuk didn't answer with words. He simply stepped aside, allowing a team of federal agents to swarm the room. Behind them stood a camera crew from the very news network Douglas had spent millions to influence. Tae-Hyuk hadn't just found him. He had ensured the world was watching when the golden boy of Hair Global finally fell. "Douglas S. Hair, you are under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault," the lead agent announced, her voice echoing in the cramped space. Douglas scrambled to his feet, trying to regain some semblance of his former stature. "Do you know who I am? My lawyers will have your badges for this. Donna, tell them you're fine." I stepped forward, the light from the news cameras catching the burgundy satin of my dress, which I still wore like a suit of armor. I looked at the man who had spent years trying to make me feel small, and for the first time he looked minuscule. "I am fine, Douglas," I said, my voice calm and cold. "But I'm not your wife anymore, and I'm certainly not your silence." As the agents forced his hands behind his back, clicking the steel cuffs into place, the fixer's files, the ones Tae-Hyuk had recovered, began hitting the wire services in real time. The emails, the recorded threats, and the offshore ledgers were being broadcast to every screen in the country. The mask was gone. The world saw the gambler, the abuser, and the fraud. Douglas kicked and screamed as they dragged him toward the door, his frantic curses muffled by the rising noise of the sirens outside. He caught my gaze one last time, looking for a flicker of the fear he used to own. He found nothing but a steady, silent resolve. Tae-Hyuk placed a hand on my shoulder as the room cleared. "It's over, Donna. The monster is in a cage." I watched from the window as they shoved Douglas into the back of a police cruiser. The elite world that had turned its back on my screams would now spend the rest of the week dissecting his downfall. He was no longer a king. He was just a man in cuffs, heading toward a cell that no amount of hair money could open. I placed my hand over my stomach and finally, deeply, exhaled. For the first time in my life, the air was clean. The grand ballroom of the Mosshair estate looked the same as it had 6 months ago. The same 1,000-crystal chandelier, the same smell of expensive lilies, the same string quartet playing Vivaldi. But as I stood at the top of the marble staircase, the air in the room felt entirely different. It didn't belong to the ghosts of the past. It belonged to the future. I wore a gown of deep emerald silk that flowed over my now unmistakable curve. I wasn't hiding my stomach behind lace or clutching a pregnancy test in terror. My hand rested openly on my bump, a gesture of pride rather than protection. Beside me, Jang Tae-Hyuk stood in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. He didn't need to unbutton his shirt tonight. The mere tilt of his head was enough to command the silence of every person in the room. As we descended the stairs, the crowd parted, not out of a desire to ignore me, but out of a profound, calculated respect. The woman in the silver gown was there again, but this time, she didn't turn back to her champagne. She bowed her head slightly as I passed, her eyes wide with the realization that the woman she had once watched being dragged by her hair was now the one holding the keys to the city's influence. "You're glowing, Donna," a senator remarked, stepping forward with a practiced smile. It was the same man who had checked his watch while Douglas assaulted me. I stopped and looked him directly in the eye, my gaze steady. It's amazing what a little freedom can do for the complexion, Senator. Or perhaps it's just the relief of knowing exactly who my friends are. The man went pale, stammered a greeting to Tae-Hyuk, and retreated into the crowd. Tae-Hyuk leaned closer to me, his voice a low, private vibration. You're getting good at that. You almost don't need me anymore. I'll always need you. Tae-Hyuk? I whispered, glancing up at him. But I don't need you to fight my battles for me. I just need you standing there while I finish them. We reached the center of the room, the very spot where the old legacy of the Hare family had died in a burst of violence and greed. Douglas was gone, serving a 20-year sentence in a facility that didn't have marble floors. The Hare name was a footnote, a cautionary tale of hubris. Tae-Hyuk raised a glass, and the room went still. To a new beginning, he said, his voice echoing with the authority of a man who had fulfilled a blood debt and gained something far more valuable. And to the heir who will never know the weight of a cage. I raised my own glass of sparkling water, looking out at the faces of the elite. I wasn't a victim, a piece of property, or a secret debt. I was Donna J. Moss, and beside the most dangerous man in the room, I had finally claimed my own throne. As the music swelled, I realized I wasn't looking for the exits anymore. I was exactly where I was meant to be,